When most people hear St. Valentine's Day Massacre, they usually think about Chicago, 1929. 7 people associated with the North Side Gang were lined up and killed, and it was most likely done by a gang working for Al Capone. But when I think of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, I go to Europe in the medieval period during the Black Death. Because in Strasbourg, 1349, around 1,000 Jews were burned to death, blamed for causing the plague. So I've already done a whole video on the Black Death. I'll link it at the end so you can watch it and get some basics on the plague and how it spread and all the recent advancements we know. So today I'll spare you the nitty-gritty details, like all of that, where it came from, symptoms, Now, we know that the Black Death arrived in Italy in 1347, and from there, with cramped, crowded, and overpopulated towns, the little Yersinia pestis bacteria had no problem spreading from person to person, wiping out an estimated 1/3 of Europe's population by the time it started fizzling out in 1351. Though it is worth noting that in some areas, the initial Black Death outbreak continued until 1353, but the worst of it was 1347 to 1351. So many people died, and so quickly, that they didn't know what to think. Many couldn't fathom the idea that their God would deliberately punish them with plague. We have to consider the historical context here. This is way before the era of germ theory in the late 19th century, that's the 1800s. Many people believed that it was miasma, or poisonous diseased air, that caused things like plague. I break all of that down with more detail in my Black Death episode, or other episodes that deal with early medieval European diseases in medicine. And early modern Europe. I talk about it a lot. So, when looking for a why, most people turn to what explained other things they couldn't explain with science or math or logic or reasoning. They turn to religion. God must be punishing us for some kind of transgression. But then, after a while, people thought, no, it's not us or God. It's someone else deliberately causing this. And so, they looked to the usual scapegoat for problems in Europe, the Jewish population. In early 1348 in Spain, rumors started circulating that the Jews were poisoning the wells. It's important to note that this was before the Spanish Inquisition, but the anti-Jewish sentiment existed before the Inquisition, the forced conversions, all of that. I did an episode on the Inquisition as well. It's also important to understand that despite these rumors, those in positions of power didn't support them. The Pope, kings, the Holy Roman Emperor, even local officials of small towns, they didn't seriously believe that the Jews were poisoning the wells. Pope Clement VI even put out a papal bull in July of 1348 to try to protect the Jews from undue blame and harm. Here's a quote from that source. Quote, "Recently, however, it has been brought to our attention by public fame, or more accurately, infamy, that numerous Christians are blaming the plague with which God, provoked by their sins, has afflicted the Christian people on poisoning carried out by the Jews at the instigation of the devil, and that out of their own hot-headedness they have impiously slain many Jews, making no exception for age or sex. And that Jews have been falsely accused of such outrageous behavior has done nothing to cool the rage of the Christians, but has rather inflamed them even more. It cannot be true that the Jews, by such a heinous crime, are the cause of occasion of the plague, because throughout many parts of the world, the same plague, by the hidden judgment of God, has afflicted and afflicts the Jews themselves, and many other races who have never lived alongside them." End quote. So, there we go. In 1348, the Pope himself discredited these rumors. But unfortunately, that wasn't enough to stop persecution. Now, though I'm going to focus on the massacre in Strasbourg, it certainly was not the only town where Jews were blamed, rounded up, killed, etc. We have records of it happening in a lot of towns. But here's the disconnect and my guiding question here. If the Pope says there's no credence to the rumors, why did people continue to blame the Jews anyway, despite what their religious leader was telling them? Well, they thought they had proof. Let's talk about a man named Agimet, also written in some sources as the Latin Aquitus, but I'm going to go with Adjamet. Adjamet of Geneva, on October 20th, 1348, confessed to poisoning several wells. A source detailing his confession tells us that, quote, Adjamet the Jew, who lived at Geneva and was arrested at Châtel, was there put to the torture a little, and then he was released from it. And after a long time, having been subjected again to torture a little, he confessed, Adjamet was sent to Venice to buy silks and other things. When this came to the notice of Rabbi Peiret, he sent for this Adjamet and said, We have been informed that you are going to Venice to buy silk and other wares. Here I am giving you a little package of half a span in size, which contains some prepared poison and venom in a thin, sewed leather bag. Distribute it among the wells, cisterns, and springs about Venice, and the other places to which you go, in order to poison the people. End quote. This source goes on to say that Adjamet poisoned the Venetian well in question, and then ones in Calabria and Apulia before traveling to France and doing the same thing in Toulouse. And although Adjamet isn't the only Jewish person tortured into a confession of poisoning wells, it's just one example of many, I'm afraid. But this certainly didn't help. Rumors were now flying around that, despite the Pope's assertion that the Jews were not to blame, this guy Adjamet confessed to doing it. So it must be true after all. Never mind that he was tortured into this confession, there was no actual proof the wells were poisoned, and there's still the logical argument that Jews were dying just as frequently as Christians. But that didn't matter. As people kept dying rapidly from the plague, they needed something, or someone, to blame. And the Jews became the scapegoat. Here's a selection from a letter from officials in Cologne to their counterparts in Strasbourg on January 12th, 1349. Quote, Very dear friends, all sorts of rumors are now flying about against Judaism and the Jews, prompted by this unexpected and unparalleled mortality of Christians. Throughout our city, as in yours, many believe that this mortality was initially caused, and is still being spread, by the poisoning of springs and wells, and that the Jews must have dropped poisonous substances into them. When it came to our knowledge that serious charges had been made against the Jews, we sent numerous letters to you and to other cities and towns to uncover the truth, but we have been unable to get the whole story either from you or anywhere else. If a massacre of the Jews were to be allowed in major cities, it could lead to the sort of outrages and disturbances which would whip up a popular revolt among the common people. And such revolts have, in the past, brought cities to misery and desolation. In any case, we are still of the opinion that this mortality and its attendant circumstances are caused by divine vengeance and nothing else. Accordingly, we intend to forbid any harassment of the Jews in our city because of these flying rumors, but to defend them faithfully and keep them safe. And we are convinced that you ought to do the same. End quote. So like I said earlier, those in positions of power, including local ones like the officials of Cologne and Strasbourg, didn't believe the rumors at all. But the common people did. And there were enough people angry about their current situation and fearful of death that they ignored reason and logic and lashed out. This chilling and prophetic warning from Cologne wasn't enough to stop the people of Strasbourg from rounding up and killing those they blamed for the plague, and in part to remove the Jews from their town who were competition for local businesses. And so on Valentine's Day in Strasbourg, 1349, roughly 1,000 Jews were rounded up and burned in a Jewish cemetery. I say roughly because I've seen sources say 900, but here's a quote from a contemporary Strasbourg historian named Jacob von Königshofen. Quote, The deputies of the city of Strasbourg were asked what they were going to do with their Jews. They answered and said that they knew no evil of them. Then they asked the Strasbourgers why they had closed the wells and put away the buckets, and there was great indignation and clamor against the deputies from Strasbourg. Quick note, by the way, the council that wanted to save and protect the Jews was removed from power a few days before the event. The new council rolled over and did what the angry mob wanted. Back to the source. So finally, the bishop and the lords and the imperial cities agreed to do away with the Jews. The result was that they were burnt in many cities, and wherever they were expelled, they were caught by the peasants and stabbed to death or drowned. On Saturday, that was St. Valentine's Day, they burnt the Jews on a wooden platform in their cemetery. There were about 2,000 people of them. Those who wanted to baptize themselves were spared. Some say that 1,000 accepted baptism. The council, however, took the cash that the Jews possessed and divided it among the working men proportionately. The money was indeed the thing that killed the Jews. If they had been poor, and if the feudal lords had not been in debt to them, they would not have been burnt. End quote. So there you go. The medieval St. Valentine's Day Massacre. The Jews in Strasbourg were rounded up and killed as scapegoats for an illness that couldn't be explained. But it gets complicated because it wasn't simply just the belief that the Jews poisoned the wells. As this last source points out, the working men in Strasbourg wanted them gone, so they wouldn't have competition. And since it seems the Jews in Strasbourg had lent money to feudal lords, well, that complicates things further. They were scapegoats for the disease, but it might have also been a convenient excuse to remove those they considered different. So, happy Valentine's Day, everyone! Let me know in the comments if you want more minis about topics involving the Black Death. I did one a few weeks back on Princess Joan of England, the first royal who died during the Black Death. My name is Kelly Beard, and thank you for listening to this AF-Out mini on the medieval St. Valentine's Day Massacre. If you enjoyed this episode, go check out some of my other minis, or my longer podcast episodes, which drop every other Sunday. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on any more bloody, gross, mysterious, or weird stories from history.